Hey guys, welcome back. It is TechLock here. I hope you have been well. I want to thank you guys for the outpouring of support from the last Arena video that I posted. It seems like I helped out a lot of you guys and made Arena seem not as scary or intimidating as it might be off the get-go, especially from a free-to-play perspective in 2022 with the ever-changing meta and new units seemingly power creeping the game every single banner that releases. But because of that, I want to talk about another free-to-play aspect of the game, which is our compiling here. And about a month ago, we got our normal 3 paths, and over that past month, I've had a lot of time to digest a lot of content from FEH creators, a lot of videos talking about which path is the best and how to utilize your codes. And the first thing that I have to notice is I really do have to laugh at a lot of these videos, because what they're doing is they're valuing these paths as if we have access to every single path right now in March of 2022. Even playing at a high level of the game, you wouldn't even have 1,000 codes at this point, and based on a reasonable play style, if you're playing every day, logging in, doing fairly well in all of the game modes, you can expect to have about 20,000-ish codes in a year. And what that means is you're not going to have, at the absolute minimum, the ability to pick up a 2,000 level manual until at least June, 2 months from now. And then for most average players, it's not going to be until September until you can really get through maybe a path and a half or something. So it's just really laughable and nonsensical to me for people to value all these paths and try to pick which one is the best in a game that you don't have access to these even remotely anytime soon, and the meta is shifting way too frequently. Another big thing that I think isn't covered too much is the fact that as a free-to-play player, we suffer from optimization paralysis. And what that is it limits the use of this fodder that we have because we're not whaling, we don't have unlimited resources. And so if you look at a content creator and they say, oh yeah, well, Sturdy Impact right here is super cheap because it's only at a 1200 level code. Yeah, it's cheap, but at the same time, it also comes on a code that has guard bearing, which is even probably more of a premium skill. And we don't even have something that's similar to guard bearing in the normal code 3 paths. So yeah, obviously, Sturdy Impact is a great skill, but it's super rare amongst units to fodder. And even if you picked up this Ingrid manual, you'd be hard pressed to give it to a cav unit or a infantry unit because you don't want to throw away guard bearing. It's too valuable to just leave on the side of the road, essentially. So that's what I've noticed is those two things is obviously taking account of these codes way before you have access to them, as well as not accounting for the F2P optimization paralysis is what I call it. So with that baseline being sent, I want to kind of go back and look at some of the previous paths to kind of give preference to what I want to talk about, which is mostly that as time goes on and in a year's time when we have access, can't have access to multiple of these paths, the meta will have shifted and the valuation will have certainly shifted of how we look at these units. Let's take normal 1 for example. When this first came out, obviously this Awakening Fates path was by far and away, everyone said it was great. You have you have a fighter skill here, you have a 500 SP skill and Wrath, you have close counter, and you have no follow-up, which was one of the really big treats of the normal 1 paths. Well, nowadays, yes, I can still see a ton of value in Vengeful Fighter and Xander and Owain as combat manuals, but no one would ever in their right mind spend 2,000 codes on a Corrin here, because if we go into the code 2 paths, we have 2 units, both Merida and Fallen Male Corrin, with no follow-up at 1,200 codes, and they come with a premium ace skill. I believe it's attack speed solo 4 for Fallen Male Corrin and Flashing Blade 4 for Merida, so you can do kind of dual inheritance there, so you can get a tier 4A skill as well as no follow-up. And then even in normal code 3 paths, you get both Asbel and Nyx, who have no follow-up at 800 codes. So why would you be spending 2,000 codes for this unit when you can get no follow-up plus better skills at a much, much cheaper price? Now, it's not to be saying like all old units get devalued immediately. Some units actually increase in value. Right here, Hector. his value has skyrocketed tremendously, because as we see these enhanced counter skills, we need DC as a prerequisite. So if we go look at, let's say, Brave Marth here, in order to inherit both distant pressure and one of these two skills, you need DC as a prerequisite, which is where Hector here would be a great boon. Also for Ephraim here, he is the only instance of Bold Fighter in the manual paths, which is interesting, at least from this one. I know we just got Valentine's Fae, who has Bold Fighter as well, but from this standpoint, he is the only one with the player phase fighter skill, and he has Attack Defense Solo 3, which allows you to take advantage of increased fodder optimization for both Fallen female Morgan in this path, as well as Shinon here with Attack Defense Solo 4, and then you can take into account Deadeye, Time Spell, Slow Attack Speed, whichever one suits you as well. Going back to devaluation, I thought, back when I had these codes, I thought that Ishtar would be a great unit to spend my codes on, and frankly, I haven't even used this manual yet, just because Swiftsparrow, we get Swiftsparrow for much cheaper in the new paths, and while Air Orders is pretty niche, we got that as a seal, and I don't think, as long as we have a seal on it, and I think it's a super niche skill where you don't need to have a manual of it as well as a sacred seal. Also, we have a ton of special Spiral 3 fodder, especially coming out on 4-star special unit in Ninja Male Corrin, which basically means I made a huge mistake going through all the way through this path. If I could go back and do it again, I probably would not have taken, maybe I still would have taken Lewin as maybe a merge, because his Forseti Refine is good, but certainly would not have spent 2,000 codes on Ishtar, maybe put it towards Hector for his DC. Heroes, Heroes is not even worth mentioning at this point, and I will still say Mystery and Shadow Dragon, definitely still great fodder. When you look at Pala for especially maybe like a Gale Force Air Force team in Aether's Disarm Trap is super valuable there, and she's the only one with this type of skill out of all paths, so that's good. And then obviously as we go on and the visual stats become more and more important, Fort Def Res 3 certainly has become more and more important whether you put it on Flying Eldigan or Mythic Alencia recently, who's someone who takes the use of visible stats. So that's kind of how this value has fluctuated in Normal 1, in Normal 2. We already mentioned that Ingrid here is great, but we suffer from a little bit of optimization paralysis. Bernadetta, she's good, but if we look at the newer paths, we can get attack speed, push 4 for cheaper, and lull speed defense is a great B skill. Obviously synergizes well with attack speed, push 4 if you're trying to fodder them both to the same unit, but at the end of the day, you can get similar skills for cheaper later on. Byleth, obviously, with the ability to fodder distant counter and then being the only unit in the paths at all that has Ruptured Sky, he retains a ton of value here. A good example of how the meta has seriously shifted is the Heroes Awakening Fates path. When we first came out, everyone was thinking this path was by far and away the best, and part of that comes from Midori here. And obviously getting a free, not free, but quote-unquote, the ability to use codes to get Spendthrift Bow combined with Close Foil was in a time when Spendthrift, Close Foil, Norn was all the rage. And now we just don't see that. The meta has shifted to save skills, has shifted to a lot of player phase skills that can break through some of these skills. And I mean, you just don't see archers with the Spendthrift Close Foil combination as prevalently anymore. So maybe not as valuable as when she first came out, and the people who may have gone all the way through this path are kind of kicking themselves. Going back, Sayuri, when she first came out, we're like, oh yeah, perfect. She has Close Call, which is a DR skill. But now we're looking at it where we have a ton more damage reduction skills available, and with her, it has unfortunately driven down her value, because Close Call unfortunately is one of the lower tier DR skills. We have Spurn down here, which is obviously one of the best DR skills. And if you're looking at a tank, typically you're going to want to look at a mirror stance or a sturdy stance instead of kestrel stance. Typically with a tank you want to build up bulk, not exactly speed, especially if it's an armor unit. So kestrel stance 3 is super niche. And if you're looking for a stance kill, you get one for much cheaper down here with Osium. So obviously there's still tons of value, as I mentioned, with Corrin with no follow-up plus his tier 4 solo skill, but these two have severely dropped off given the shift in the meta in the past year. Path of Radiance Radiant Dawn, I think, holds its value tremendously well. With the rise of damage reduction meta, means that Deadeye is going to be more and more needed. Definitely holds its value quite well. Times Pulse, and I think Times Pulse is great just because as you go through the shifts in the meta, you really want to focus on stats and conditions and triggers that you can control. And obviously Times Pulse is giving you faster cooldown acceleration, which is something you can control rather than maybe, let's say, a chill skill. I say chill skills are basically dead because they're competing with the beast skill that has so many options at the moment, and you can't choose who you inflict that -7 speed on. It goes at random to one of the, or not random to one of the foes, but there's many foes with, and it only goes on the highest speed stat. So you can't really control who it impacts, which is why I think chill skills are really tough to use. But going back to the Path of Radiance Radiant Dawn, Gatry is fantastic for the same reason that Cliff was, given the Fort Def Res 3, but again, suffers a little bit from optimization paralysis, saying that you want to fodder this to a specific armor unit because of how valuable Crafty Fighter is. Nyla's okay. He is fantastic. Obviously, if you're using a far save unit, Distance Defense 4 is fantastic, and you get it for super cheap here. Alright, moving on to the GBA pass, and pay no attention to the fact that this number has suddenly changed. Not going to beat a dead horse, but not a big fan of chill skills given the competition for the B slot, as well as your inability to target who it impacts. And for the entirety of this path, just the fodder has really aged poorly, and I don't think the fodder really is top tier to build efficient units anymore. For Joshua, he offers a tier 4 C skill, but it's really one of the worst tier 4 C skills. I think its only use now is just providing a 300 SP sleeve slot for an arena score stick, but apart from that, for actual functional play styles, there's so many better C skills. Nils, good unit, but don't really need infantry pulse. You can get that pretty easily from the Grail shop in Marissa, and even Pulse Tie, while it's a good skill, it's a rare skill, but it's also a super niche skill, and I just don't see too many people running it nowadays. I come across it very rarely, and when you find a unit that it works for, great, but I don't find too many players actually building around that specific skill. And it's also mostly building it was to stop these pre-charged nukers, and that's really fallen off. I mean, every single AR team that I ran into had a pre-charged Ophelia nuke. That just doesn't happen anymore, and that meta has completely died away. Not completely, but it's definitely not as prevalent as it used to be, and removing the cooldown buildup is not as meta impactful as it used to be. Lion obviously is an amazing unit in of itself. I have him +10, and for the fact of his tome and utility and stats, like, he's a great unit, and this is a great merge if you need a merge on him. But as far as his skills, it's not great. I mean, you can get this Rouse skill from Spring Sala. Again, there's so much competition in the B skill that Null Sea Disrupt, it's good, and if you need it, obviously this is the only place to come get it from in the codes pathing, but I think there's a lot more efficient use of your codes than just with this one particular B skill. And bonus doubler, visible buffs, just the meta has really shifted away from visible debuffs, and it's now visible buffs, and it's now more towards in combat buffs. So bonus doubler, especially with how many units are out there that negate buffs too, I just don't see it being as relevant as when it used to be. So unfortunately, with his A skill and C skill being not great, it's hard to justify 1600 codes for just a B skill. And then for Guinevere, another case of where the unit herself is amazing just because she has a tome that's effective against all magic type foes. But as far as the skills, it's not really that impressive. Joint Drive Res, it's a good tier 4 skill, but as far as efficient playstyles and functional C skills, there's a lot better ones out there. And I'm not a big fan of attack res push and attack defense push. Typically, if you want to increase bulk on someone, you don't want to suffer that chip damage right after combat. So, I mean, yes, like on Whittaker here, you're getting plus 7 resistance, which is nullified by her tome, yes, but in anyone else who doesn't have healing applied in their tome, or like if you're unless you're running Mystic Boost, it's really a net gain of only 2 stats because you're boosting res by 7, but then you're still taking that 5 damage afterwards, so it's just kind of counterintuitive for attack res push and attack defense push, which is why I don't really use those as far as building up efficient units and play style. Now moving on to Genie and Thracia. Lachesis is a good unit, a really good dancer, really awesome utility as a flying dancer. Air Orders, super niche though, and because it's a seal, a sacred seal that you can just slap on anyone, I feel like this skill here, the inheritance, really has gone down because how many teams are you running with 2 Air Order seals on them, and if you have that sacred seal to move around, it's hard to justify inheriting that when, again, a lot of competition for C skills. Ocean actually is really good, obviously being a really cheap mirror stance skill here for 800 codes. I think that's some of the best value in this entire code 2 pathing. Merida, talked about her before, but the fact that she has a tier 4 A skill along with null follow-up at a decently cheap price, can't say enough that probably definitely still value remains here. And even still with Flashing Blade too, because you are working with your own unit speed and you can kind of control how your speed fluctuates compares to opponents. I still think there is relevance for that on on Gale Force teams. Moving on to Ethlyn, this is where I think the value in this path has severely dropped off. Again, you can find Wind Sweep in the Grail shop on Joshua. ARD, attack speed, all the AR skills, I don't think they took off the way IS thought they would. I thought they thought that there's going to be super meta shattering and super meta relevant and they're going to be super premium skills, but really no one uses them. I come across them maybe like once a season in AR, if that. I really don't see them, and I don't see them being too impactful for units, and because it's only limited to AR itself, it's hard to justify putting it on a unit if you're using it in multiple game modes. And finally, Bridget suffers from the same thing that Nils does in the fact that when she came out, it was awesome because she had Pulse Smoke, and there's such little Pulse Smoke fodder. But because we're not dealing with those pre-charged nukes as much anymore with the shift in meta to what it is currently, 2,000 codes for Pulse Smoke is really not the same value that it used to have. Also, Steady Impact is good, but you have this one for cheaper, and this is obviously more offensive based. Steady Impact, just because it's 2 stats that are a mix of offensive and defensive stats. Typically offensive units want to use attack and speed, defense units want to buff up defense and res, and trying to combine those two leads to, like, do I use this on a defensive unit? Like, obviously it's a player phase unit, but why would I want defense if I'm attacking into them and trying to gain as much attacking stats as possible? I just don't see it as a very efficient A skill for most playstyles, so that's why I don't think 2,000 codes is a good investment for Bridget. Going down to Mystery of the Emblem, it's definitely fallen off except for Chris. Like, this whole path is redeemed because of this boy right here. He still possesses Spurn 3, which is the best DR skill in the game currently, in my opinion. Plus, as far as a joint drive skill goes, joint drive attack is probably the best, and definitely helpful to boost attack of units when they're together, and being able to easily fodder those two together makes him such a premium unit, and I highly recommend, if you still have the codes around, for any speedy allies that you're building up, he's definitely a one to go for. But as for the rest of the units, Conrad Melee Bikui might have had some value because it has a mini impact skill, but now that we have Impact Sword in the Grail shop, kind of worthless. I mean, Berkut, would you rather have Mirror Stance or Warding Stance? Enough said, same cost, doesn't matter. Katria herself, if you have multiple copies of her, I think she's a fantastic unit just because of the utility that Astra Blade provides, and obviously the Flyer's mobility, which I'm a big fan of. But I think as far as fodder goes, again, aerobatics, you have that seal. so you can definitely play around with other B skills because you can throw that in the Sacred Seal. Attack speed bond, especially with the flyer and the mobility that they have, it's hard to really kind of position your units around utilizing attack speed bond. Yes, if you watch my arena video, I did put this on my young Innis, and that works in a very, very niche way, but I definitely will be planning on upgrading him sooner. And then Est, she's good. I'm not a fan of the chill skill, but you know, Fury 4, you can't really argue against that. So that concludes my review of the Code 2 pathing, and moving on into Code 3. And this is where I'm going to talk about not the value now, but what units I think have the best ability to retain value into the future. And if you are going to look to spend your codes on this Grail pathing, which ones do I think will stand the test of time? Just to preface it, I think that I'm going to put a lot more emphasis on skills that you can control. Like Bernadetta here has attack speed solo 4. Very easy condition to meet, just being solo, and it's very well within your control as a player, positioning your units to make sure that solo skill is completely active instead of, let's say, a catch skill on Zeke. Well, I'm not trying to diss catch skills, but I'm just saying they're harder to activate because A, we have a lot of units who can negate penalties. We have Harsh Command Plus, which nullifies them, Restore Plus from a staff unit. Yeah, just tons of ways to negate that, and even the foe's HP being 100%. If someone's running a Winter Bernadetta, you lose that immediately. So it's just, I'm going to place more emphasis on skills that you can control. Alright, with that preface out of the way, let's go through these paths and see which ones I think will really be beneficial going forward, which ones have the best potential to hold their value, where you might want to be wary investing into it early on because the fodder might not be as good a year down the line. All that fun stuff. Well, starting off with 3 houses, we have Casper here. He's basically your ticket to the game for the rest of this path. Not a big fan in the current meta of what Bonus Doubler does. With all the panics going on, in combat debuffs, we talked all this with Fallen Lion, applies to Casper. You're just paying to get access to the rest of this path, which I think is pretty good. Starting off with Winter Bernadetta, obviously her weapon is good, but you can't inherit that. But what makes it great about her is she has an amazing Tier 4 A skill, which obviously you can control. Setting up the solo aspect of it is very easy for you to enforce that effect on units. And given the fact that Rao's attack speed is now in the Grail pool with Ninja Shamir, she's basically attack speed solo 4 fodder combined with lull speed res, which is a great B skill. It makes it very easy and efficient when you come to looking at what to fodder off of her. Same can be said about Legendary Dimitri. Same thing goes with attack speed solo 4, but obviously Odd Tempest is a great C skill. I really think that at 1200 codes, it's a tremendous value for a skill that we put on flyers and infantry units, and you can catch a lot of people off guard with 3 spaces of movement. And because you can't fodder his B skill, same applies. It's very easy. You're coming in and you know you're foddering off those 2 skills. There really is no 2 ways about it. Moving on to Rhea is where my love for this path starts to fall off. I'm just not a big fan of Unity skills because A, you just can't confirm that you're going to get the max effect. Obviously getting 19 attack and 19 res for a net bonus of 12 in each it sounds good, but you don't know how often you'll be able to trigger that. It's all dependent on if someone's running penalties on your unit and if your unit even gets targeted for those penalties. Obviously it's a great counter to menaces, which are super prevalent in Arena, but apart from that, if you're not getting hit with penalties, it just becomes a glorified bond skill. No better than a attack res bond 3. Where she really shines here is Dragon Wall, and I think this is a fantastic skill for dragons with damage reduction. And obviously with only 2 skill inheritance here, it's really easy, you know what you're foddering off. You can get attack res bond 3 from the Grail pool, making it super easy. And I've seen Dragon Wall used super efficiently and super well, and I think it's one of the best B skills possible. So if you're building a dragon with high res, obviously this is a very, very alluring skill to put on there. And then you don't really have to think about your A skill. You can just kind of quote unquote settle for attack res unity, obviously synergizing with Dragon Wall. And finally move on to Gatekeeper. I know he's well loved in this community. He's such a meme, but I'm just not a big fan of the value here at 2,000 codes. I think it can be better spent elsewhere. For a joint drive skill, obviously, I don't want to pay 2,000 codes for a joint drive. There's better C skills, cheaper, and I mean, with these counter skills, we've seen such like a power creep with Legendary Sheeta and Valentine Duo Crom, where we're having like I think there's going to be so much advancement in some of these counter skills that close reversal will be left in the dust sooner rather than later, and the 2,000 grails overall will be, or sorry, 2,000 codes will overall be a bad investment. Moving on to Kaden, he's okay. Obviously snag skills are okay, but you can't use them on infantry units like Legendary Crom, Duo Crom, and Legendary Lucina. And until we get a Cav or flying unit that has the ability, the same kind of assist things, I don't think snag skills are going to be really that prevalent. So a little bit less of a ticket in, but still, you know, you're paying to get to the rest of this path, which I think might be one of the best in Code 3s. Talked about Nyx earlier when comparing her to Adrift Corn from Pathing 1. 800 codes for null follow-up is a tremendous value. I think this will be one of the most purchased units in this pathing, and obviously, like, if you're building up a unit like Yanfei, she's absolutely perfect, giving him null follow-up and a tier 4 solo skill to synergize with his weapon. Moving on to Charlotte, I'm kind of torn on Charlotte. She obviously has a damage reduction skill, but as far as DR goes, it's more of a enemy phase skill. Yes, it's still active in player phase, but it's really more thought of as when you're tanking a unit, you want that damage reduction. And so Frenzy is a little bit counterintuitive in that regard, but I think that kind of helps a little bit, because if you want to make a good Gale Force unit, you can fodder both. Because you can't fodder both Times Pulse and Frenzy, you have to do Swift Sparrow 3 with either one of these, and whichever one you're needing, you can just do Swift Sparrow plus either Times Pulse or Frenzy, and I think Times Pulse has an equal value, and I wouldn't be too upset to throw away Frenzy here. And also, it's nice getting Times Pulse, as it's much cheaper at 1200 codes here, as in the previous Pathing 2 with someone like Shinon. Morgan, I'm a little torn on it as well, just because, like, again, amazing. Everything that I talk about, being able to control the battle. Obviously, you can set up who attack defensemen as targets. You can set up her solo ability to trigger very, very easily, except the only issue is that we have optimization paralysis again, patent pending now. With Dive Bomb being such a valuable B skill, that you're not going to want to put this on a non-flyer and kind of waste this Dive Bomb skill, just because it's so rare. I think it's only on 2 units in the entire game. So I could see a lot of people, and I'm not a big flyer fan, so probably will end up using this for the A and C skill here. But it's gonna be a hard conversation when it comes to getting rid of Dive Bomb. But that one's good. And here's Robin, which I think warrants a massive conversation. Why people think this is so good, because of all the save skills, but how relevant is the save meta going to be? We've talked about how fast the meta shifts with this game, and what we're going to see later on is that we see Kanto was so good, and now we have Kanto control on one unit, and it's going to keep coming more and more prevalent. More and more skills will be added to units where they can do Kanto control, basically nullifying out these trace skills. So if we have a skill that most likely is coming that will bypass saves or nullify saves, this Robin loses a ton of value. And then with his fighter, it's not one of the best fighter skills in my opinion, just because we have units inherently that do this in their weapon. We have Adun, we have Brunya, we have a lot of people that do nullify penalties. I mean, hell, just throw Harsh Command on someone, you can nullify penalties that way. And once you take those 2 items out of the equation, what do you have? You have Sturdy Stance, which is a stance skill for 2,000 codes, and we just saw we can get Ocean with Mirror Stance for 800 codes. So I'm going to be really wary about getting to either Robin or Henriette down here with the save skills. I'm going to wait a while. I would really recommend waiting a ton on those units just to see how the meta shifts as far as saves go, to see if they do retain their value. I think those 2 units are most at risk of devaluation. Moving on to Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, Vika, she's really, really good. Just a fun unit to use. Obviously, beast units and being a flyer, she gets the advanced movement. The solo skill is a great precursor for Nyx. Sabotage attack, it is in the Grail pool, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Astrid, 800 codes is great for a merge, just because her weapon is so good, granting extra movement. But mostly what you're looking for here is the rally skill combined with the ruse skill. Put that on a support unit in Arena, and you're golden. That's what you want. Sephirin here, he's good. Again, I take issue with attack res push. We've talked about that, but he is the only use of auto recovery, and while I don't see it when it first came on, like people thought this was game changing, I haven't seen it used as much nowadays, but I still appreciate that there is quite a market for it. So at 1200 codes, I think something as rare and unique as auto recovery, I still think it holds a value. Volk, again, these 1600 code manuals are just killing it. Being able to fodder sturdy impact and times pulse, or sturdy lethality and times pulse, or lethality and null follow-up, maybe given the fact that you have a null follow-up here at 800, you're probably looking for either times pulse or sturdy impact and lethality at the same time. Still great value, still getting two really top tier skills to put on a unit. Unfortunately, in Asala, I could not recommend less to use 2000 codes on him. Do not use it. Stall ploy, it's so hard to activate here, and we have Reeve. We just got Reeve as a free unit who has a much easier condition to inflict stall on foes. I haven't seen anyone really inherit stall on people, so that C skill is not valuable in my opinion at all, and Reeve does it way better for way easier and cheaper. Trace skills we went over. As Canto control becomes more and more valuable, these Canto skills are going to fall off, and I'm gonna be wary about investing in Canto skills until I can see what the actual meta determines as far as how relevant they are. And obviously that only leaves us with attack speed solo 4, which we can get for 800 up here. Moving on to Sacred Stones and Binding Blade. This one, even though it just came out, this has suffered so much downgrade in like just the past month. Trace. We've already seen where we can get this skill much cheaper, and far traces are completely nullified by Canto control, and inflict speed res -3. Come on, that's bad if that's all your B skill can offer you. Same goes for Shanna. She's a little bit more fodder to play around with, but it's still, her main value is the Canto skill, which I'm not going to invest in at this point until I know how prevalent Canto control will really be. If it's going to be solely for Makoto's Refine and doesn't show up again, then yeah, it's going to be super rare, but if we see it really come out in a lot of skills, then I would be worried about going this far. Dussel, he's really good. Again, stuff that you can control. Diaphra solo 4 is awesome, and as a unit, he's just so good. So I have one. Honestly, I would consider this as a merge. Luis might be the best value of the entire Code 3 pathing, just because attack speed ideal 4 really embodies what everything I say about controlling it. You can control your own HP. You can control what bonuses are active on your unit. And there's just being able to pair that with a dual rally skill. I think, yeah, definitely get Luis. Cannot say that as much. Juno's Juno. Moving on to Heroes Genealogy and Thracia. We're looking here. I actually like Infantry Flash 3 a lot, and I'm glad that it's on more, now you can get it instead of having to fodder off a legendary Marth. It's free here in the code pathings, or not free, but you know, easier to get. If you have a speed built arena team like I do with Ninja Shamir and Yanfei, this is obviously super valuable for getting a special cooldown, and you don't have to worry about putting a stance skill on their Sacred Steel slot, and you can really invest in their stats more. Aspel, fantastic. Fury 4 plus null follow-up is tremendous fodder for 800 codes. Don't need to talk too much about that. Larse here, she's very similar to what I said about Charlotte, but again, for 1200 codes, for just the range of skills that you can inherit off of her with 2 tier 4 skills plus a DR skill, I think you get a lot of flexibility with where you want to use her. Still think it is very valuable at 1200 codes. Moving on to Sarah, this is where I would stop with this path. Again, the push skill here, you can get it for so much cheaper. We get Dazzling Staff for free from a bunch of limited hero codes, and also even in pathing 1 we had Dazzling Staff for 1200, in codes 3 we had it for 800, so there's no point in putting 600, 800 towards it. And you already know my feelings at this point about joint drive skills. It's not worth it for 1600 codes for any of these skills. They're pretty low tier. Yes, the volume is there, but the tiering, how high I would value them, is not for 1600 codes. And Henriette suffers the exact same fate as Robin here with Slick Fighter again, with the save skill. I've already talked about how if something comes out that can bypass them, the meta's completely shifted, and I'm gonna wait. I really want to hold off on seeing where that goes. And plus, you need 6,000 codes. You might be not even able to get any of these pathings for a long time. So we'll be able to have plenty of time to see how we want to use it. finally, this is the last and absolute best pathing out there in my opinion. Berkut, he's good, you know, it allows you to kind of give a little breach. If you have a Marianne, you can use her tier 4 dual skill with something else, so he's a good prerequisite. I love Katrina here, again, maybe not for the chill skills, but it's a pretty cheap rain, and we all know rains are good, in combat debuffs are really good, so the rain plus the speed solo 4 here, we got a lot of attack speed solo 4, so I'm loving the solo skills. Zeke is amazing. He's so freaking good. With Sedgar coming out, giving us attack, defense, catch 3, and you can do catch skills and this menace skill at the same time inherited to someone. That's crazy. That's tremendous value for 1200 codes. And I know I compared it in saying I preferred... that was just an example. Catch skills are still tremendous. It was just an example to prove a point. Moving on, Freya... while it's 1600, it's just still tremendously value with the fatal smoke that she provides and how crazy good that skill is. That's a C slot skill. And because you can't fodder her B skill, it makes the optimization of her fodder really easy. It's going to be the tier 4 solo skill plus fatal smoke, and you don't have to give a second thought to it. And finally, Marth is just an absolute cornucopia of fantastic skills, whether it's a Tempest, whether it's Spurn, one of the best DRS skills in the game, plus the heightened tier of distant pressure. All around the board, just a fantastic unit. Obviously, this is where we go back and we say why Valentine Hector's value has come up, because now you just need to fodder off Valentine Hector's DC, and then you can inherit distant pressure and Spurn, or distant pressure and even Tempest. I think you can't go wrong with both, but he's the one that right now I think is the best. If you're gonna go early on 2000 code manual, Marth by far and away is the absolute best. So that's my tier ranking, that's my thoughts. If you kind of notice the theme here, everything I've been saying is everything up until 1200 really is amazing value. Everything after that, that's where I start to be wary, obviously, for the value you get here. And what we see a lot is that the skills that are prevalent on these 1600 and 2000 code manuals, they typically show up the next year in the 400, 800, and 1200 range. So obviously take advantage of the value that's here, especially in the 800 and 1200 range. And then, you know, if you have the excess codes lying around, yeah, you can go for these higher ones, but also that's when you want to wait, especially on the tier 4 and tier 5 manuals, until next year's pathing rolls around, because maybe we're going to get some of these skills, like maybe we'll get Spurn for 1200 codes, or definitely get some trace skills that are going to be much cheaper than 2000 codes if they're still relevant. But that's my takeaway. I know this video has been very long, very rambling. If you're still around, thank you so much for listening. I really hope this has helped you, given you some insight on how I view codes, how you could possibly take the most advantage of them. Been meaning to make this for a while, so yeah, all I do is I just want to say I hope this helped you, and thank you for sticking around to the end. And as always, I'm signing off, and take care.